Okay. We are good. We're recording.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll just say this is base group one talking about the Alvermann article. So we can start with that first question or a sentence. It is likely that youth who are not motivated to read start to develop low perceptions about themselves as readers in early elementary grades. So did you guys find that anywhere as an assumption in the article?
I agreed with that inference,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought page 191, when they talk the potency of one's beliefs about
Mm-hmm.
about is phenomenal, and I thought that led into that whole idea of perception and positive self-image being a successful launching board for reading in later years.
Ah.
I agreed with that too, although I also remember from the O'Brien lecture and slides that early on kids do start with the positive self-conception, and then there's at some point where that breaks and their literate identities start to disintegrate. And I wasn't sure exactly when that starts, but I do have a feeling that it can start early on and it just manifests later on.
Yeah.
But I felt like there was an argument for both sides.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'm a pretty literal person, so trying to look through and find that direct inference about it starts when they're young, I didn't see that specifically in the text, but I could definitely see that argument being made. I feel like it was O'Brien was saying like when the shift is made from learning to read to reading to learn, that's often when like the kind of wheels go off the tracks for a lot of kids. So it was interesting to see like how that might connect.
Right.
Okay.
Cool. Let's go to the next one. Let's see, ironically, the experience of being in school and the way reading is implicitly defined there has a significant negative impact on motivation for reading.
I said definitely yes. I thought that was reiterated several times. Especially, I pulled out pages 195 and 196 where it talked about struggling readers and their needs. And there was one quote that I wanted to share. Generally unsuccessful in school literacy tasks that involve print-based texts. As such, these labels tell us very little about the reader, though they do suggest ways of thinking about culture and adolescents who, for whatever reason, are thought to be achieving below their full potential as readers. And then just a little farther down, it says, this culturist disability notion is just before that. It takes a whole culture of people producing idealizations of what everyone should be and a system of measures for identifying those who fall short. For us to forget what we collectively produce, that we collectively produce our disabilities and the discomforts that conventionally accompany them. I thought that was a really powerful quote.
Yeah.
I agree also. I thought that this was upheld by the reading that we did, and I had a couple of sightings too. I found multiple references that I thought succeeded in illustrating that point. When they talked about the transmission model of teaching, this emphasis on skill and drill, and how that was kind of a negative thing, and how most educational models are centered around the teacher and the instructions that go along with that, and how this can impact student engagement, which was talked about on page 192. And that's the mediating factor according to the text. So,
Right.
Yep.
I don't know if I have anything to add to that. You guys are great. Awesome. Way to pull out a ton of citations. That's great. Thanks. All right. So this next one, at the time Alvermann wrote this piece, adolescent literacy was not in the national spotlight and had been largely neglected in comparison to elementary reading. And that one I actually found kind of interesting because I know it was David O'Brien who was saying like this is kind of a newly created thing, but it's always been a problem. But I did think there were spaces in the article that kind of alluded to that. I was looking at page 189, like right away in the beginning.
Yes.
Where it talked about the reading wars, and how we've been focusing so much on elementary.
189 is a reference I saw also there, and that's the one that I cited too when you talked about adolescents and their specialized literacy instruction and how that's somewhat put in the background. So I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah, me too. I think that it was implied that it comes and goes in trends in terms of what the public sees and how the research drives what the public sees and how they respond. So yeah, it's always there. It's just a matter of if it's a matter of public opinion or not.
Right.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Next one. We are on number 4. Although the term adolescent literacy is liberally used, it is much broader and ambiguous than the term reading, and reading should be considered within the broader context of literacy.
Yes.
I thought yes, and I looked at page 190 where they talked about the reading being a complex process, but a lot of times it's subsumed under the broad area of literacy. So I felt that that inference was supported by the text on that page and probably in other places too.
Yeah, I pulled just after that again, the same one as you, Brian, but also this one I referenced earlier on page 200. When printed texts were not privileged over other forms of literacy, the students appeared capable and literate. There's several times when they talk about this definition as very, very narrow and to the detriment of our assessments.
Right. I agree with you.
Absolutely. Okay, adolescent literacy scholars have a good idea about which comprehension strategies are most worth teaching, but these are seldom systematically implemented. What did you guys think of that one?
Difficulty with. I didn't find any real support, concrete support in the article for that. I did find on page 194 that they talked about how these different comprehension strategies are identified, but no choice or no claim that they're always implemented because of classroom issues, classroom size, classroom time constraints, and so on and so forth. But I will tell you, just from my own experience being in several different classrooms, a lot of these strategies are used very well. So I think the school I've been in, I've seen a lot of usage of that. So I didn't find there was no real support here from what I've read that they're not being used. But.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one thing that was interesting to me was I almost had a hard time finding, like, yes, all adolescent literacy scholars agree that there's a best way to do this. I felt like that wasn't even within the reading, that here are some ways that reading is taught and here are some of the strategies that people are focusing on. But there was almost an argument of, like, is this really working? We're not quite sure. So
yeah, good point.
I totally agree with all of you. I use the article kind of as a case in point. Like there were many, the whole article is about things that work. And then at the same time, it's so complex that, we know that many things work, but clearly that we're still not seeing what we would think we would see. So I thought it was implied. And also I was thinking what O'Brien said is, we know exactly why we have a problem. We have things we do, and the reason we don't see the results is because we don't do them. So I think there was a yes and no.
Yeah. I feel like these were kind of written for that, huh? Okay, so although educators are preoccupied with reading print and traditional notions of reading texts in school, outside of school, adolescents are increasingly reading texts that look less and less like those in school. What did you guys think?
I said most definitely. That there were several points there. They talk about the net generation.
I know.
And
the early name for millennials.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of reading. It's just not the school-based printed format.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I thought this was the easiest one to find as far as a reference, and I cited 198 where they talked about adolescents' interest in the internet, hypermedia, and various other forms of interactive communication technologies. And if you've been in a school for a minute lately, you realize that this is all going on, and it's a shift away from the printed text to these forms.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing that was interesting was on page 201. I think that was where I remember seeing it discussed that it's really pressure from the public more than in the classroom, and there's that kind of push-pull between the public sees this as a major issue and we need to work on this, and teachers kind of know we need to be including other areas. So I thought that while, yes, I know that's important, there was another piece that was almost countering it as maybe it's not only the teachers, maybe there's external pressure contributing to that as well.
I agree.
Yeah. Cool. All right, let's see here. So number 7, even though school districts and individual schools and teachers initiate interventions to help struggling readers, the narrow definition of reading assessed and taught in school actually creates struggling readers. I thought this was another pretty straightforward one, honestly.
Did we just do that one? I'm sorry. Are we out of? Did I write this down? Okay. Yeah. No, I get it. I wrote I misnumbered them. Thank you.
Yeah. I thought on like 196, consider the possibility, I think Katie, you were talking about these, consider the possibility that culture arranges for certain types of students to take up the position of struggling reader by institutionalizing that set of school-related tasks. And they're going to come up short.
Okay. Yes.
I found 190 also to support that, where they talked about the privileging one form of literacy over multiple other forms has been criticized for ignoring the fact that different texts and social content require different reading skills. And so I felt that upheld that argument.
Right, definitely. All right.
Yep.
Last one here. Defining the literacy that adolescents engage in as practices rather than skills has the summative effect of helping them see themselves as more competent than using traditional print literacies alone. That one I honestly struggled to break apart and figure out what it was saying, so I'm going to wait and see what you guys say about it.
I did too. That was the one that I had kind of left with a couple of ideas, but wasn't like, oh, I can point exactly to that. But I think that was implied in the participatory section of the article and in the critical literacy part of the article, where you can break down, and so they're not attached to your worth or your value as a person, but these are things that we take on in different contexts with different texts. So the critical literacy and the participatory learning were two things where I thought that it was implied.
I agree with that. I looked at 198 also, where they talked about treating texts as tools instead of resources, and talked about active engagement as supporting this argument too.
Yes.
Awesome. That sounds good to me. I agree with you guys.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I think that was the last one, right? There were only the 8, so I think we're all done. So I'm going to turn off the recording here.